Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Niven, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. It's lovely to be here.
Niven, your journey is full of reinvention, which I absolutely love. From CEO at 29 to a PhD candidate at 50, can you tell us how you approach the process of personal reinvention and what has been your biggest learnings through each transition?
That's a lovely question. And first of all, that's a lovely compliment coming from someone like yourself, whose own story is one of quite significant reinvention. You know, maybe unlike mine, the reinvention was imposed on you. I chose my reinventions. But I suppose even when things are imposed on you, you can choose to flourish despite them, or you can be crushed under them. So it's to your credit that you flourished, and compliments back to you. I suppose for me, a friend said to me once years ago that sometimes there's things in life that you can't not do. And I think it's the same for me with reinvention. You know, there were points in my career, in my life, when I wasn't consciously thinking about it as reinvention. I was just facing a crossroads or a fork in the road, and I couldn't not try something different. I couldn't not do something new. And I think in all cases, they were probably a combination of a push and a pull. You know, the push was, no, I think I've done what I wanted to do. I've completed it, and that's fine. And the pull was, well, okay, who do I want to be next and what do I want to do next? And I suppose I probably have a very different definition of risk to many people. And I think we're all well aware of the idea of risk. The risk that something bad will happen, the risk that things will go wrong. And I mean, that's a very real and rational and appropriate thing to think about. It's necessary that we think about the risks of things that can go wrong. But I think equal and opposite to that is the definition of risk that we don't often think about. And this isn't something I've sucked out of my thumb. This is the real technical definition of risk, is that it's equally and oppositely composed of the risk that good things will not happen. And, you know, Andrea, I don't know about you, but if I reflect on my own career as a manager, as a leader, I was about to say very seldom. In fact, I was never asked to think about the risk in terms of what are the risks here that good things will not happen if we don't try this, if we don't do this. It's always about the negative and preventing, as opposed to the counterfactual possible and positive. And so I suppose that for me is how I think about risk as well, is what might I regret if I don't do this? And if I fail, well, that's not necessarily the failure. The not trying is the failure.
I love that. Not trying is a failure and not learning from experience, right? I
Yes,
mean, that's
yes,
also something that is so profound. And often those failures are what teach us so many insightful things.
yes. I mean, Daniel Pink wrote a wonderful book, it's somewhere on my bookshelf behind me, about the power of regret and how, first of all, futile it is to wish to live a life of no regret, because it is impossible. It's never going to happen. So you're setting yourself up to be disappointed and to fail. But then second of all, to not recognize the power of regret in what it teaches you about what you do and don't want to do in your life, about what you do and don't want to repeat. But exactly to your point, I mean, that doesn't simply come from the experience. It comes from reflecting on that experience and making meaning out of that experience. And it's the meaning that propels us, not the experience, because you can have 100 people have the same experience happen to them. They will experience it very differently, and they will or will not make meaning of it very differently.
Yes, and since you touched upon the topic of meaning, I know you have faced a personal challenge with cancer. And I was wondering if you would be open to share how this experience shaped your understanding of purpose and joy?
Well, I think I was incredibly fortunate. I've had cancer twice now. One was breast cancer, one was skin cancer, and both of them were detected incredibly early. And it's funny, actually, if I think about it, there's so much discussion around imposter syndrome. And funnily enough, with my breast cancer, for which I had to have radiation and surgery, but not chemo, I remember sitting with my oncologist, who was and is the most wonderful man, and saying to him as I went into the chemo clinic, well, the cancer clinic, the oncology center, gosh, I feel like a bit of a fraud coming in here. Because, of course, if you've ever been in an oncology center, you see people really in desperately ill circumstances and desperately sad situations. And I said to him, because I'm looking at people who can barely walk, I'm looking at people who are vomiting into a bucket, who have lost their hair. And I said, I feel like a fraud coming in here because I'm simply getting my radiation, having simply had my surgery. And radiation does not compare to chemo. And it's the only time I've ever seen my oncologist, who, like I say, was a very jovial, very light-hearted man, get deadly serious. And he looked at me and he said, Niven, you are not a fraud. You are a poster child for early detection. And I let that sink in because he meant it very strongly. And so I took it very strongly as a reminder that this stuff is real. And had I not detected it, it could have turned into rampant stage 3, which is what my mother had in her early 40s. And I think, there are so many things that happen in life that I call crucible experiences. And we don't have to play Crucible Olympics to see who's been through the worst. The range of Crucible experiences are many. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you. Thank you for your service, but your job is no longer available. I want a divorce. Mine was, Niven, we need to talk about those test results. But we have all, and I think none of us will, emerge unscathed from a life without crucible experiences. And so again, to your point, to your question, to your crucible experience, well, what do you do with that? Where does that take you? And for me, I have been incredibly intentional about my life. I haven't had a life that I've sleepwalked through. Sleepwalked. I think sleepwalked is probably right. I've lived my life consciously and intentionally. And there was something about cancer that really brought home to me the Confucian saying, we all live 2 lives. And the second one starts the moment that we truly understand. But I mean, truly understand that we only have one. And so I think that was a very visceral reminder of something I've always intellectually and emotionally known to be true, and then suddenly understood at a very different level.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I truly align myself with everything you have said because, yes, those deep, profound emotions reshape who we are. And I often say that Andrea, before the first brain operation, was one person, and Andrea after is a completely different person. I mean, yes, there's a lot of commonalities. It just it's so profound in terms of the things that you look at life that are truly important. It felt as if before the operation, you focus on things that are actually not as important, from titles to images that maybe other people, you know, give you. And it's funny how even in the process after the diagnostic of the brain tumor, I was clinging to that image and almost did not want to let go of the image of Andrea being strong and almost like the superwoman. And in reality, it was such a revelation for me to let go and and
Mm.
basically let go of that image that others had forged on me, and really begin a completely new journey that actually connects with 1 million years of joy and everything that I do today. So thank you so much for sharing, because it's true that sometimes we forget that we are not here to live forever. Um, and I want to now dive into something that you have said in the past, whereby you have mentioned that autonomy and variety are like oxygen for you. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, about 7 years ago, I decided to back myself, and it was for 2 reasons. One, I got fired. So I didn't really have a choice, but actually it was the best thing that could have happened. And the second one that came from that experience was being very clear I never wanted to fill in a leave form ever again. Because, of course, it's not about the leave form literally, it's about the leave form metaphorically. And what it means is that I'm having to ask for permission for what I do with my time and by extension, my life. And I'm only allowed to do what I want to do, what I feel called to do in so many weeks of the year. For the rest, my time is a company's time. And that's the trade off that you make. And that's the price that you pay in return for the reward of a salary and the opportunities that come from having a job, of which there are many, of course. And I don't take those lightly and I don't diminish them. I mean, especially living in a country like South Africa, where our official rate of employment is 35%. So there are swathes of people, generations of people who will never be employed, who are unemployable in terms of their skills. And so employment, meaningful, gainful work, whatever it is, and I've worked as a chambermaid, I've worked as an apple picker, I've worked as a dishwasher, work matters, work has meaning. And so, like I say, I'm certainly not diminishing that value. But for me, it got to the point where I thought, this asking for permission of what I get to do with my time, of what I get to do with the things that are of huge importance and interest to me beyond my paid role. This is not something I wanted to do anymore. And so I'm very happy to now make the trade off. That to me, again, doesn't feel like a trade off because it feels like something I can't not do, of backing myself and doing a range of things on my own terms, in my own way, and certainly in my own time. So choosing what work I want to do and what clients I want to do and where and how I fit it into the other things that really matter to me. Traveling really matters to me. Studying really matters to me. Spending time with the people I love really matters to me. And these are all part of the tapestry of my life, as opposed to the things I fit in on the 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of leave that I have every year, you know. And so that was something that just suddenly became very clear to me. And frankly, I think it's going to stay clear for me for the next 30 or 40 years of my life, which is why I want to keep working until my 80s. And again, I don't think that's a pipe dream. We are living 100-year lives, and I look at people who I really admire, who are even more prolific and skilled in their 80s than they ever were. I want to be like them.
Since you've spoken that even getting a job in certain environments may be challenging, I know you have taken deliberate steps in the past to leave a role, to leave a position, and leave that security, especially when you're at the top of your game. What advice would you give to individuals who feel a certain pull, that inner instinct and emotion that really is drawing you to pursue a path into the unknown, but you're holding back and you're possibly lacking the courage to do that? What step could they take to actually decide what is the best route forward for them?
Well, let me give them the advice that I was given in my late 20s. So I just started working as a professional. So I always joke it was the first job that I had where I had to shower before I went to work and not afterwards, you know, because as a backpacker and as a student, I had all kinds of manual labor and blue collar work. And I'd been in this company for about 2.5 years, a fantastic company, incredible grounding. We got training out of Harvard Business School. The founding professors were all from Harvard Business School. I was earning as much as my father was in his 40s at the time, late 40s. So, you know, it really was a fantastic role. And my parents thought, gosh, you know, how did Niven land the lottery getting into this very impressive, very professional firm as the first person in my family who studied at university? And about 2.5, 3 years in, I remember having a conversation with a friend of my dad's, and it was very interesting. I mean, I wasn't very close to this man. I knew him, but we'd never had a one-on-one conversation. He just happened to be in the city where I was, just happened to reach out and said, you know, if you want to grab a drink or some dinner, it'd be lovely to see you again. So we went and we had a drink. And I remember he was a very successful entrepreneur. I've lost touch with him. I'm sure he still is a very successful entrepreneur. But I remember offloading that, you know, I really wanted to leave this job and I was starting to get restless and starting to feel like I wanted to do more. And so he looked at me and asked the obvious question, well, then why don't you leave? And I gave him the answer that I suppose many people would give as the answer to the question, well, it's the security. It's the security of a good job. It's the security of a good paycheck, of money being put away every month for my retirement. And this man just looked at me like I had completely lost the plot, or I was speaking such an unintelligible language, and I may as well have been speaking Urdu. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean, what I mean? And he said, Niven, you've completely missed the point here, which certainly didn't go down very well with me because I thought I was quite hot stuff. And he said, if you think that a job is security, if you think money in the bank is security, well, then you've never been fired or retrenched. You've never had a company downsize. You've never lost your savings on a bad investment or have a company and a bank go bankrupt. He said, so I'm not saying that these things aren't very nice things to have. They're wonderful things to have. But they are not the real security in life. The real security in life is knowing that you will always figure things out, that you are your own best security and that you will always make a plan. And he said, so here I am talking to the person who for 4 years backpacked with the only things that she owned were the things that she could fit in her rucksack, would go to new countries, new places, find jobs, find support, speaking English in countries where they didn't necessarily speak English. So you were perfectly capable of doing that, and now suddenly you want security. Where and how have you lost the most important understanding in life, which is you are your own best security? And Andrea, he said that, and something just clicked for me, and I thought he's absolutely right. And so, of course, money makes a difference. I think it was Kanye West who said, having money is not everything. Not having money is everything. And he's absolutely right. I mean, I have had to beg for money. I have really worried about how I'm going to pay my bills. So, of course, money makes a difference. Of course, decent works makes a difference. But they're not security. They can be taken away. They will be taken away. They have been taken away. And I have always made a plan. I am my own best security.
How beautiful. I want to connect the dots now with what you have said, and particularly individuals that remain in companies where they're ignoring this hidden drive to maybe want to do something more. And clearly, a lot of research has indicated that this engagement at work is a worldwide issue. It's not as if it's a problem in North America and not in this specific location. It's a problem everywhere. What, in your view, can leaders do to create environments where employees actually feel a greater sense of engagement, but also can experience more joy?
This is such an interesting point, and one that has driven my work for so long. Because just to add to the point that you're making, this is also not just a problem that has suddenly emerged from COVID, when the genie has been let out of the bottle and people have been working from home and suddenly are struggling to come back. No. If you look at the Gallup engagement survey, which should more accurately be called the disengagement survey, this has, as you say, been an issue for years. And in fact, when I started working for myself, a very good friend of mine said to me, don't talk to me about what you're going to do. Tell me the problem you're going to solve, Niven. And it was interesting, Andrea, because I'd never consciously thought about it. I'd never, therefore, verbalized it. But as Graham asked me that question, I suddenly looked at him and I said, the problem that I'm going to solve is that we've got about 80% disengagement in the world, passive or active, So that's a data point that's not disputed and has been shown to be true year after year. And there's another data point that's not disputed, and it comes from the work of Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who did all the work on flow, where he found that 80% of adults, 80% of us, even if we were to become financially independent, so we didn't need to work, we made a great investment, or we won the lottery, or we got a wonderful bequest, or whatever, sold a very successful business. We didn't need to work. 80% of us would still want to work. So I said, so that's the problem that I solve. What have we done so spectacularly wrong in organizations that most people are dragging themselves through their day, their week, and sometimes their whole career just wanting it to be over so that they can really start living? And yet most of us are wired to want to work, to want to contribute, to want to be part of something that matters. What have we done so wrong in terms of processes and systems of reward and recognition and many other things? what are we doing so wrong in terms of leadership that we're killing this in people? I mean, the cost, the opportunity cost, the tragedy of this. I mean, on a good day makes me want to scream, on a bad day makes me want to cry for a week, because it is such a lost opportunity for individuals, for companies, for societies, for economies. And so I think when I do leadership sessions, I provoke people. And one of the things I ask them is a question. It's not my question, but it was a question I was asked for the first time in my 40s, having been in leadership positions since I was a child. And the question is, why should anyone be led by you? Really, really, why should anyone be led by you? And of course, being led by you and choosing to follow you is not the same as complying with what you say. Okay, complying is rational, compliance is rational, but followership is emotional, and the two are not mutually exclusive. You can comply and follow, but they are not the same thing. And I don't think that many people, many leaders, have ever stopped to ask themselves that question. But I think having asked yourself the question, if you are vaguely or remotely a conscious human being, you will think long and hard about what the answer is and what the answer may be relative to what you would want it to be. And so I think, at the very least, given the shadow that gets cast by leadership, leaders need to ask themselves that. And then I think in terms of joy, I remember when I had this young girl follow me or spend the day with me as part of a Take a Girl Child to Work Day project in South Africa. It was a national essay competition. She won the essay competition, and so she got to spend the day with me in the position that I held at the time. Of course, a friend of mine, who's very funny, said to me, "Well, what was second prize, Niven? Spending 2 days with you." I'm like, "Oh, do shut up." But she spent the day with me, and out of all the things I exposed her to, going to the business school where I had an engagement, sitting with some of the top women in the country, going to meetings. At the end of the day, the thing that stood out for this child, who was about 13 or 14, said, "Niven, you really seem to love your job." And I said, "No, I do." And she told me that her mom, her dad, and her grandmother, all of whom lived in the same house, hated going to work, just hated every moment of it. And so for this youngster, the most extraordinary revelatory part of spending the day with me was that you actually could love your work. Frankly, that you should love your work is what I said to her. Because she just, her whole life up until then, assumed, well, work is the price that you pay in order to pay the bills. This idea that you could give yourself permission and grant yourself the right to pursue joy at work was utterly alien to her. Utterly.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that because, as you're saying, it's so sad actually, and such a lost opportunity. And often, when I think about the corporate world, what many people or individuals despise are the politics. And
Mm.
I want to now connect the dots to your book called "If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You."
Yes.
And I was wondering if you can share some of the key insights that individuals could actually take to navigate office politics more effectively.
Yeah, lovely. You did that very skillfully, by the way, the connecting those dots. I admire it. I saw what you did there. Yeah, so look, I mean, one of the things that I speak about is how many of us have thought about and had our IQ and EQ developed throughout our career. And thank heavens EQ is getting as much attention as IQ and technical competence, right? But this idea of political intelligence, I don't think it's occurred to anybody, really. And this is also not a new phenomenon. Rosabeth Moss-Kanter at Harvard Business School said it in the 1970s, that it is easier, frankly, to talk about money and sex in organizations and at work than it is to talk about politics and power. It's this thing that is very real, but that we are very loath to look at or engage in, because we have all kinds of perceptions, many of which are misperceptions. And certainly, I think for me, for most of my career, I actually didn't know what I was talking about when I said, I don't come to work to do politics. Because I didn't understand what politics actually are. I only understood the one story of politics, the story of the negative, the toxic, the narcissistic, the Machiavellian. And I mean, look, of course that is true. that has happened, that will continue to happen, that people are less than and people are treated less than they could be or should be in organizations. But in fact, if you look at the actual definition of politics, it simply refers to the informal, the unofficial, the sometimes behind the scenes ways that we get things done in organizations. We sell ideas, we get support, we give support to make things happen. And so that definition is completely neutral, which means, yes, of course, you can have bad politics, but you can equally have constructive and ethical politics. And so, what I often do in workshops is I put up this definition. Okay, it's about the informal, the unofficial, behind the scenes ways to get things done. And people have all kinds of connotations around that. But then I shift the conversation by asking two things. One, do you recognize yourself in this definition? Do you do these things, the meetings before the meetings, the phone call separate to the work discussion to get some support, the coffee to get approval for a budget or for a project? Do you do any of these things? And it's very unusual that people say no, no, no. But when they say yes, yes, but that's not politics. That's stakeholder management, or that's being strategic, or that's socializing my ideas. I'm like, yes, I don't care what you call it. I'm just asking, do you do this? And then the second question I ask is, and has anyone ever in your career done some of these things for you? Been the sponsor, picked up the phone, lobbied for you? Has anybody ever done this in a way that you have benefited? And then, of course, you see the light bulb start to go on because, yes, of course, people have done this for me. And so it's like a LinkedIn post that I put up today. Yeah, when this stuff works for us, we call it strategy. It's only when it works against us that we call it politics. It is the same thing. It just depends, though, whether you're sitting on the benefiting side or the harming side or the being harmed side. If you understand this stuff or you don't, if you see that this is something that you can learn, that it's a skill, or that you think, well, I'm not able to do this. And certainly if you get over what is for me the biggest myth around all of this stuff, which is that you can either be a decent human being or you can play politics, because of course only psychopaths play politics. No, no, no. You can be perfectly decent and perfectly constructive and ethical in how you build your political intelligence. It doesn't have to be a single story.
I want to go back to the young lady that was able to have a revelation from spending the day
Yes.
with you. And when we're looking at the younger generations that are about to migrate into the workforce, I want to also connect the dots now to an HBR article that you wrote, which was called Why You Shouldn't Treat Work Like School. And you emphasize that work and school require different mindsets. Can
Yes.
you elaborate on the key mindset shifts that people need to take when transitioning from the academic world to the work environment?
Yeah, so that article was actually prompted by an observation that I read a good few years ago by Sally Krawcheck, a very successful US entrepreneur. And she said that in her experience, and I would echo it with my experience, the single biggest mistake that she's seen women in particular make at work is that all too often we treat work like school. So we think that if we put our head down and we work really hard, somebody's going to notice, is going to say, well done, and it's going to give us an A. And so I think this is particularly prevalent amongst women. Of course, not all women and not only women, but I think this might well be the shadow side of the fact that girls generally do better at school and at university than boys do. You come in greater numbers, get higher marks. And women and men enter the workplace in roughly equal numbers in most countries. But then, of course, the drop-off to the senior levels is universal. So there are very few women in very senior positions. And I don't know how many years of research has been devoted to trying to understand why this is. But I think this idea that for girls and the recipe of success that served them so well at school and university is potentially one of the big reasons, because, what got you here will not keep you here and will not get you there. I mean, that's a truism in life in so many ways, but particularly for girls and women, what got them here will not keep them here or get them there, in terms of understanding the political nature of organizations, in terms of understanding that this focusing on their to-do list rather than their to-build list, building their political capital, building their relationships, their power, their influence, and their authority, is a real challenge. And what I'm finding very interesting in my PhD, which is all about whether office politics are different for women, is that many people get a little bit queasy about the idea of politics. Is it brown nosing and ingratiation and all this backroom stuff? So most people have a single story of it. But for women, that single story is not just a single story of unease. It gets to the point of we feel a moral repugnance to politics because we have all kinds of moral judgments around this. And again, I think it possibly comes back to this idea that at work, at school, I gave the right answer, I did my work, and I got on with it. Well, at work, there is no one right answer. There are multiple answers, depending on the agendas and the priorities and who has power. At school, you don't have to like people to get the A. At work, we are interdependent. And so you need allies, you need coalitions of support, many of whom you may not like. But barring their behavior being unethical and criminal, frankly, even if you don't like them, if you need to work with them, you have to find a way. And so, there's so many reasons and so many ways where you can expand this metaphor, but that really is where it comes from.
Very, very insightful. I want to talk more about joy, and I know that you have traveled extensively,
Yeah.
particularly during the 4 years in your younger days, and you have been exposed to so many different cultures. And I was wondering if you could share with us how your global experience has shaped your understanding of joy, both personally and professionally.
What a lovely question. I suppose the first thing that comes to mind, and it may be one of the questions that after the podcast is finished, I'll be thinking, I should have answered that. But this is the answer that comes to me now as you ask that question. And I'm reminded of a bloke I used to work with. His name was Sebastian Matthews. I'm sure he's out in the world still somewhere. And Sabs had the most cherubic, beatific face. He looked like an angel. And he was always just incredibly calm and peaceful. And he had this wonderful energy about him. And one day I walked past his desk and he was looking a little bit concerned and a little bit frustrated. And I said to him, Sabs, are you okay? Because you don't look very happy today. And he looked at me again with this angelic face and he said, well, Niven, I'm never very happy. So, of course, I remember doing a double take and saying, what do you mean you're never very happy? He said, because, well, happiness is all a function of what happens or doesn't happen to you. So something good happens, you're happy. Something bad doesn't happen, you're happy. Something bad happens, you're unhappy. He said, so I'm never happy, but I'm always joyful. And I thought, well, isn't that a wonderful distinction? And I suppose it's that idea from meditation that our mind is the sky, our thoughts are the clouds. And what Sabs was saying was his mind and his heart and the sky was one of joy. And the happiness, unhappiness were the distractions and the clouds. And I think that's still probably the most lovely definition of joy, of gratitude, that it happens and it exists independently of what happens in your life. And let's not veer into the realm of toxic positivity. I think that's something completely different, and I think that's something very destructive, actually, frankly. But this deep sense of joy and gratitude that I say this to a friend of mine, it's so easy to fall into the trap of, I've got to get to work, I've got to do this, I've got to get the kids to school. But a crucible experience of life, like yours, like mine, like ones that people have people who are listening to this will have had, I think just reminds you of how many things in life we get to do. We get to do this. And I think when your worldview is of all the things you get to do, and I say this again, being very, very wary of toxic positivity. But my dad died last year and he was in ICU in hospital for about 4 months. And even as he was dying, I could I could say and genuinely mean, I get to say goodbye to my father. You know, my partner's father walked out the door in the morning and never came back because he was killed in a car crash. So I get to say goodbye to my father. That's not perverse. That's gratitude. That's joy, and finding it wherever you can.
How beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. If we continue on the conversation on the topic of joy, and if there would be a recipe for joy, what would be some of the key ingredients that it would contain?
I think the only ingredient is gratitude. You know, I think there's that wonderful saying, that line, which I think comes from the Bible. I'm not particularly religious, so I can't guarantee it, of standing knee deep in a river and dying of thirst. And I think how easy it is for all of us to be standing knee deep in a river and dying of thirst, knee deep in a river of love, of care, of opportunities, of people who care deeply about us, of health, of a roof over our head, of enough food to eat. I mean, the list is endless. And we standing knee deep in those rivers and still dying of thirst because we don't see it. We don't recognize it. We don't appreciate it. And so I think if you are wanting a life of joy, that the gratitude is because you can always, if you want to, if you look hard enough, you will find things to be grateful for. And then that's both the cause and the effect of joy, I think. You know more about the subject than I do, but that's my experience.
Fully agree. It's so, so beautiful what you've just shared. And since you've taken a lot of time off on a lighter note, if you could actually take a year off right now, where would you go and what would you do?
So another year off, because I have taken 2
Yes,
years of sabbaticals off.
yes.
Japan. Japan is my bucket list. Oh, I'd love to explore Japan properly. And they've got a Camino that is similar to the European Camino called the Kumano Kodo. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that horribly. But I would adore the chance to spend some real time in Japan and get to understand a culture that is so fascinating and so beautiful and so different in so many ways, and really immerse myself in it. And then possibly back to South America. Chile, out of all the countries I've been to, and I don't speak a word of Spanish, Chile was the only country I've ever been to where after a few days I suddenly thought I could live in this country. So what made me feel that? I have no idea, but I thought it was the most remarkable country where I don't speak the language. I know something about the history and the culture, but very little. It's very isolated. It's a fraction of the size of South Africa. There's not the obvious cultural bridges of going to an English speaking country. But yeah, Chile and Japan. So if anybody's listening and wants to give me a ticket, I'm all yours.
And if you could have any superpower for a day, what would it be and how would you use it?
What a lovely question. If I could have any superpower for a day, the superpowers that I do have is I don't get jet lag and I can sleep anywhere. I mean, literally anywhere, even standing up. So people are very jealous of those. The superpower that I would want is to have every single person in the world able to see themselves the way that the people who love them see them. Look, I think that might be a bit of a problem for narcissists. I mean, they see themselves, so it might be a bit of a bump down to earth for narcissists, but I think they're in the minority. The majority of us simply don't see ourselves the way the people who love us see us. And I mean, we can beat ourselves up about all of our deficiencies and all of the things that we could do better, should do better. And then we listen to someone who we love doing that to themselves. And I don't know about you, but I want to I want to do anything in my power to stop that narrative. And yet I have that same narrative for myself. Look, at 52, I think that narrative has finally stopped. But that would be my superpower. See yourself the way the people who love, admire, and respect you see you.
Beautiful. Niven, any final words of wisdom for our audience as it relates to joy and living fully your life personally and professionally?
Yeah, I suppose one of the quotes that I've always loved in life is that a truly successful life, so let's change it, a truly joyful life, has three things: something to do. I think work matters. I think it gives us identity and meaning and purpose. So, something to do that matters, someone to love. And if you're lucky, it's more than someone. And it doesn't have to be a human, you know. There's that beautiful meme: may I strive to be the person my dog thinks I am. You know, the unconditional love that you will get from children and from pets, and something to look forward to. And I think something to look forward to in the course of your day, in the course of your week, in the course of your month. For heaven's sake, please let it not be the something to look forward to is retiring in 30 years' time with a pot of money. You need something, we need something to look forward to all the time, big, small, meaningful, trivial. So I think, yeah, a joyful life has those three things: something worthwhile to do, someone to love who hopefully loves you in return, and something to look forward to.
Wonderful. Niven, it's been such an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for being such a bright light in this world.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for wanting to hear what I say and think.